Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. I try to aim for the first of each month, so by the time this goes up I expect it'll be a little late. I ended up taking a break from the series I was originally going to review. I plan to pick it back up for September. Luckily, I'd also read a short manga series this month that I loved and absolutely wanted to talk about, but I found myself struggling to piece my thoughts together for this one. I've been pretty good lately at least separating out the spoilers, if they're included at all, but it's always harder with the shorter stories. At first, all I wanted to talk about was the big twist at the end. But I do love this series as a whole, and was eventually able to switch my focus to some of the many other things that made it great. So on that note, you don't have to worry about spoilers. But I Had That Same Dream Again does touch on some dark subjects like self-harm, suicide, and prostitution, which will be discussed briefly here. I Had That Same Dream Again is the tale of an elementary school girl named Nanaka. She's one of those kids who always has a book on hand, but doesn't have many friends, but she's definitely not the type of kid I'd describe as shy. Precocious is the word that comes to mind actually. The kind of kid you'd describe as too smart for her own good. She is very smart and intuitive about certain things, especially for her age, but not as smart as she thinks she is, particularly when it comes to understanding relationships with other people. Nanaka has a very simple view of right and wrong, and she's quick to judge others, but in a way that's pretty typical of her age. I loved Nanaka's character. I related a lot to her personal flaws, but also, I just love seeing child characters who feel real. I feel like a lot of people want to write kids to just be generically cute and sweet, and that always feels incomplete to me. Child characters should be just as flawed as the adult ones. Their flaws just usually stem from lack of experience in the world. And Nanaka really embodied that. If asked, Nanaka would be quick to defend that she does have friends. They just don't look the way one might expect. There's an old woman living alone in the woods who she calls Granny, another woman she visits in the afternoons to share snacks with. She's some sort of unspecified escort or prostitute. The day they met, someone had graffitied the word skank over her apartment's nameplate, so that's what Nanaka calls her, not understanding what the word means and assuming it must just be her name, which Skank herself just laughs off. And shortly after the story starts, Nanaka decides to explore a path branching off from Granny's house. She finds an old abandoned building, and a depressed high school girl she calls Minami cutting her arms on the roof. It's some heavy stuff for a story centered around a little kid, but a lot of the time that's precisely the reason it works. With Minami especially, where kids her own age tend to avoid or make fun of her, especially once they've seen the depth of her troubles, Nanaka tries to actually talk to her and understand. She's not weighed down by preconceptions of people who self-harm or even worries about being rude. The story really comes to be about Nanaka being more thoughtful towards others, but this friendship especially was kind of beautiful because it wouldn't have worked later in the tale. Nanaka's three friends each have their time to shine, and Minami is the first act. The driving force behind the story is a class assignment asking the kids to define happiness, which they'll do a special presentation on in front of their parents. Most of the other kids are quick to come up with examples of things that make them happy, playing their favorite games or eating their favorite foods. Nanaka's convinced true happiness must be something bigger, and she's on a bit of a quest to discover that, relying on her friends and their very different perspectives to flesh out her own worldview. Maybe that sounds a little cheesy to some of you, but I purposely got into Minami's story a bit before getting into the main story to try to give that bigger picture. Because it is a very cute, sweet story at times, but it does touch on a lot of heavy stuff too, like bullying, self-worth, and most importantly, finding that balance between protecting yourself and allowing others in. Slowly, her friends all manage to convince Nanaka that the other kids her age are worth getting to know, that there's more to them than she first assumed. Okay, it is a little mushy, but I love these sorts of life lesson stories. They can be an important reminder for anyone at any age, but one of my favorite aspects of this story was one of the things that's not specifically called out. What Nanaka can't see that the readers should be able to pick up on is that none of her friends are particularly happy themselves. With Minami, that unhappiness is right on the surface, but whenever she starts to discuss the important things with Skank or Granny, their smiles are always a little bittersweet too. Nanaka's just a bit too young to understand Skank's life and why the rest of her neighbors won't socialize with her, or to really consider that Granny's probably pretty lonely. Bittersweet is a good way to describe this story as a whole. It's really heartwarming to see Nanaka's three friends try to guide her away from the paths that led their own lives to these points. While there were certainly outside factors, they all acknowledged that there were places where their own mindsets were the deciding factor. But it's also got that sad edge, because the three are also likable characters in their own rights, and I hated to see them hurting, even if that pain was what allowed them to help Nanaka. I loved seeing her apply what she learned to the way she viewed the kids at school. It's just a shame that it was kind of too late for the other three. Which I can't explain without spoiling the end, which I told myself I wouldn't do. There's just one last point I want to touch on. Vaguely. I promise. Especially by the time I reached the end, I Had That Same Dream Again was definitely giving me Your Name vibes, in that not quite time travel, not quite alternate realities sort of way. If you weren't sold on the slice of life type story, there is a mystical element too. But also, I need this story to get a movie adaptation. It's just not reaching the audience it deserves as a manga. I'd like to think there is some hope. I Had That Same Dream Again was written by Yoru Sumino and illustrated by Itami Kirihara, the exact same duo behind I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, which got a movie adaptation a year or two ago, and which I haven't seen yet, but I did hear it was another emotional one. At the end here, I just hope I managed to get across enough about the story to pique your interest. I mentioned I kind of struggled to write this one. The first draft just felt like the equivalent of, okay, I can't really talk about it, but it's great, trust me. The second draft spoiled everything, which I really didn't want to do, but I think it took writing out the spoilers to realize that I didn't really need to spoil the story. The big twist was the most striking part of the story, but there was so much to love apart from that. I almost forgot to mention it, but the artwork was beautiful also. I Had That Same Dream Again was originally published in 3 volumes, but I've only ever seen it sold as a single collection volume, and it really wasn't that long. I would have guessed 2 combined volumes, but was surprised to hear it was 3. So they've made it easy to collect the whole thing. It's a pretty short read, and I can't recommend it enough. Thank you for watching.